My name is Ophira. I'm 29 now, and I live on my own in Honolulu. Hawaii is the kind of place people dream of when they think of paradise. Turquoise water rolling in, palm trees dancing against the wind, the rhythm of ukuleles floating in the air. People imagine family barbecues on the beach, grandparents telling stories under the moonlight, generations gathered together in one big home. That's the Hawaii people like to picture. For me, it was never that way. I grew up in Kahala, a neighborhood that outsiders see as beautiful and full of legacy homes. Tourists take pictures of the houses, whispering about wealth and family pride. But inside my family's house, things weren't as warm as they looked from the street. Behind those walls, paradise was a mask. The waves outside kept crashing in rhythm, but within, I learned what it felt like to be invisible. I want you to understand that the Thanksgiving night when I was told to leave, the night my father looked me in the eye and said I wasn't family, didn't come out of nowhere. It had roots deep in my childhood, roots that spread like weeds until they overtook everything. That's why I can't tell you about that night without first pulling you back with me, back into the shadows of my Hawaiian childhood. I was the youngest child. My brother Severin was the sun in my parents' sky, and I was the faint star you only notice when everything else goes dark. The pattern started early. I remember one Christmas vividly. Severin had scraped by with a passing grade in math, and he was rewarded with a shiny new surfboard, its bright red paint gleaming in the sun. I had come home with straight A's, clutching my report card like a treasure, thinking this would be the time they'd notice me. My father glanced at the paper and said, "Good. Keep it up." Then he turned his attention back to Severin waxing his new board. "Dad," I said quietly, holding the paper, "don't you want to hang this on the fridge?" He smiled faintly but shook his head. "Your brother needs the encouragement. You don't. You're fine." Those words burned. Encouragement was given to the one who barely tried, and silence was given to the one who carried the weight. It didn't stop there. Every school play, every recital, I would look out into the crowd, scanning faces. Too many times, the seats where my parents should have been were empty. But on Saturdays, you could be sure my father was on the sidelines, shouting Severin's name at soccer matches. One day after another forgotten event, I asked my mother why they never came. She sighed and said, "Sweetheart, you don't need us there. You're already so responsible, so independent. Severin needs us more." That sentence was repeated in different ways for years. And each time, it carved a hollow space inside me. In America, we believe parents are supposed to cheer for all their children equally, but mine acted like I was just background noise. I learned to stop asking. Instead, I clapped the loudest for myself, whispered, "Good job," into the mirror, and pretended it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. The biggest reminder of my place in that family stood in the very heart of our living room. Hanging on the wall was a large, framed portrait. Everyone was there. My parents, Severin, our aunt, even our cousins. Everyone except me. I still remember standing in front of that photograph, my little hands pressed to the glass, staring at the faces. I had been in the house the day it was taken. "Why am I not in it?" I asked one evening. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "You were too fidgety. We wanted one good photo." Too fidgety? I was 6 years old. My legs might have bounced, but does a child deserve to be erased from the family picture for that? The answer, in their eyes, was yes. That portrait stayed there for decades. Guests would come over, admire the photograph, and ask me where I was. I'd laugh awkwardly and say, "Oh, I must have been busy that day." But inside, shame crawled through me. The truth was that my family had chosen a version of themselves that didn't include me. When relatives visited, they'd point at the photo. "That's such a lovely family shot." I'd nod, pretending the omission didn't cut like glass. Years later, when I walked through that living room as an adult, my eyes would always land on it. That picture became my first hard lesson. You can live in a house, you can even pay for its upkeep, but still not be seen as part of it. Both those moments, the forgotten cheers and the missing portrait, wove together into a tapestry of erasure. They taught me to work harder, to outdo myself, believing that maybe if I shined brighter, they'd finally look my way. I brought home trophies, won competitions, paid my own way through things a child shouldn't have had to. But each achievement was brushed aside with a pat on the head or a quick, "That's nice." I remember hearing Oprah once say, "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." But children don't know how to believe that. Children keep hoping the next time will be different. So I kept hoping. And in doing so, I let the pattern bury itself deeper. Looking back now, with the clarity of age and the scars of experience, I see that those moments weren't isolated. They were a system, a way of living in which my existence was tolerated but never celebrated. It made me strong in ways I didn't realize then, but it also left wounds that never fully closed. That's why when Thanksgiving came years later, and my father told me to leave the house I had been paying to keep, it wasn't just about that night. It was about every cheer they gave Severin and never gave me. It was about that portrait hanging on the wall, a daily reminder that even in my own home, I didn't belong. The days leading up to Thanksgiving in Honolulu should have felt lighthearted. Tourists crowded the streets of Waikiki, snapping pictures of the ocean, while families rushed into stores to grab holiday turkeys and pies. The city carried its usual hum of excitement, but I felt none of it. Each morning, when I walked past the shops glowing with garlands and wreaths, I carried a heaviness in my chest. I should have been excited to gather with family, yet a quiet dread shadowed every thought of that night. It wasn't only the weight of preparing food or buying wine, it was the certainty that I would once again spend money, effort, and hours in the kitchen, while Severin would show up empty-handed, welcomed as the prodigal son. I watched neighbors string lights on their lanais, their laughter spilling into the air, and wondered if any of them ever felt this kind of dread at a holiday. For me, gratitude had long turned sour. "When you start dreading a holiday that's supposed to be about gratitude," I whispered to myself one evening as I unloaded groceries from the trunk of my car, "you know something's broken." That was the truth I could no longer deny. I had tried to keep hope alive, to imagine that this Thanksgiving might be different, but echoes of past betrayals always followed me. The memory of my mother's birthday earlier that fall haunted me like a bruise. I had saved for months, setting aside a portion of every paycheck to buy her something special. A designer handbag I knew she admired but would never purchase for herself. When I handed it to her, I was proud. I thought, finally, she would see the depth of my care. The living room was full that evening. Cousins, neighbors, even my aunt sipping wine in the corner. My mother pulled the tissue paper out, gasped, and smiled. But then she turned toward everyone and said, "Look what Severin bought me!" The room erupted in claps. Cousins whistled, neighbors murmured about what a thoughtful son he was. My chest tightened. I stepped forward, voice soft but steady. "Actually, She cut me off with a look that froze me where I stood. "Let your brother have this," she said, her tone final. "He deserves recognition." I remember Severin standing by the doorway, his smirk subtle but sharp. He didn't correct her. He didn't say a word. My aunt leaned over to a neighbor and whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "What a fine young man, always thinking of his mother." I stood there holding the box lid in my hands, heat rising in my face. It wasn't about the money. It was about being erased in real time, in front of everyone. When the party ended, I lingered in the kitchen, rinsing glasses just to keep my hands busy. Severin strolled in and patted my shoulder. "You really shouldn't mind, Ophira. Mom just needed to feel proud of me for once." "For once?" I asked, looking at him, incredulous. "She's been proud of you every day of your life." He shrugged, unconcerned. "It doesn't hurt you to let me take this one. You're strong. You don't need it." I wanted to scream that I did need it, that I had been starving for acknowledgement my whole life, but I swallowed it, just like I always did. That night, lying awake, Maya Angelou's words echoed in my head. "Never make someone a priority when all you are to them is an option." I realized then that in my family's story, I was never more than an option. By Thanksgiving week, the resentment simmered like a pot left on the stove. The stolen gift was not a lone incident. It was one of hundreds, each erasure layered on the last until my identity felt like smoke, present but unseen. Every time I raised my hand to claim space, it was pushed back down. The more I thought of it, the more dread I felt. I knew this gathering was not going to be peaceful. It was a stage where Severin would once again shine under lights I had paid for, and I would be expected to clap along. One afternoon, I drove over to my parents' house with bags of groceries. The sky was golden, the waves audible even from a few streets inland. I balanced the heavy bags on my arms, nudged the door open, and stepped into the familiar scent of soy sauce and fried onions, my mother's cooking. As I walked down the hallway, I froze. My father's voice carried from the living room. He was on the phone, speaking in that gruff but animated tone he saved for relatives. "Ophira, she does the basics," he said, almost laughing. "But she's not really family the way Severin is. She just wants attention." The words hit me harder than any slap could have. My fingers tightened around the grocery bags until the plastic cut into my skin. I stood still, my heart hammering in my chest. On the other end, the relative chuckled. My father added, "Severin has vision." "He's our pride. Ophira just helps out." I wanted to walk in, to confront him, to shout, "I'm the reason you still have this house!" But I didn't. I stood there silent, groceries pressing into my arms like weights. It's one thing to feel invisible. It's another to hear the people who raised you confirm it out loud. Later that night, when I unpacked those groceries in my own apartment, the words repeated like a cruel refrain. I tried to shake them off, but they stuck. My father hadn't just dismissed me. He had named me as less than family. And in that moment, I knew Thanksgiving wasn't going to be a meal of gratitude. It was going to be the night everything snapped. Thanksgiving morning broke warm and golden, but the air inside me felt heavy as I loaded the trunk of my car with dishes, bottles of wine, and carefully wrapped pies. I had told myself over and over to stay calm, to keep my composure, no matter what happened. Driving through Kahala, I passed houses glowing with wreaths and strings of lights, each one a picture of holiday belonging. My parents' house looked no different from the outside, large, inviting, like the kind of home where a family would gather with love. But as I pulled into the driveway, the dread I'd been carrying tightened in my chest. Relatives were already there, their cars lined along the curb. Through the open door, I could hear laughter, voices raised in joy. When I stepped inside balancing food, the greetings were polite but distracted, quickly swallowed up when Severin walked in behind me. "There he is," my father boomed, his arms opening wide as if a hero had arrived. My mother clasped his arm, glowing with pride. The attention shifted fully to him, while I stood there, invisible again, my hands full of the very meal they would eat. I set the food on the counter and took a steady breath. Holidays are supposed to be about belonging, I thought, but every time I walked into this house, I felt like a guest with no invitation. When it came time to sit down, I entered the dining room and froze. A neat row of name cards marked the long table. At the head sat Severin's name, positioned right next to my parents'. My own card was pushed all the way down, by the kitchen door. From that seat, I'd be half in the dining room, half in the shadows, perfectly placed to jump up and fetch whatever was needed. Marielle, my cousin, leaned close when she saw me pause. "That doesn't seem fair," she whispered, her eyes soft with concern. I forced a shrug, though inside the sting cut deep. "It's fine," I muttered. "You sure?" she pressed. "It's one night," I said, managing a smile. "I don't want to start anything." But as I lowered myself into that chair, the weight of it settled over me. In every family, the seating tells the truth. Who belongs at the center, who doesn't? That night, my chair told the story my parents never said aloud. As I tried to gather myself, I noticed the card in front of me more closely. The letters made my stomach clench. Staff, Ophira. Not simply my name, Staff. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the chuckles around the table told me otherwise. "Guess you're running the show tonight," my uncle joked loudly, raising his glass. Laughter rippled across the table, bouncing from one relative to another, each chuckle confirming the cruelty. I pressed my lips into a smile I didn't feel, willing myself not to react. "Mom," I said, my voice even. Why does my card say staff? My mother tilted her head as if she didn't understand the question. Oh, don't take it so seriously. It's just a bit of fun. Severin leaned back in his chair, smirking. Well, you did cook everything. Maybe they just wanted to give you the right title. The laughter flared again. I laughed lightly, as though I could join them, but inside, a wound split open. My mind flashed back to the portrait in the living room, the one missing my face, the one hung proudly on the wall as if it represented us all. Now here it was again, the same message, written out in black ink. You don't belong. Humor can be cruel, I thought as I watched them, and when people laugh, they confirm the cruelty. The conversation moved on without me, as if my silence were expected. Severin launched into a story about his latest business idea, waving his fork like a conductor. My mother nodded eagerly, filling his plate, praising him for ideas that had not yet materialized. Meanwhile, I sat near the door, my plate untouched. Morwena's voice rose above the chatter. We are so proud of Severin. He's got such vision. Marielle glanced at me again, her expression apologetic, but she said nothing. The room was loud with approval for him, yet deafeningly quiet when it came to me. I leaned back, folded my hands into my lap, and forced my breathing steady. Don't cry. Don't storm out. Remember, that was my mantra. They could push me to the farthest corner, brand me staff in my own family, but I would remember every detail. Silence is sometimes the best weapon, I told myself. Let them think you're weak while you gather your strength. As Severin's voice filled the room, I sat still, my anger restrained but alive, knowing this was only the beginning of the night's humiliation. If the seat and the tag made me invisible, what came next would make me wish I could disappear altogether. The food was finally laid out, every dish I had prepared filling the table with color and scent, but the air carried a strain you could almost taste. Plates clinked, glasses were raised, and yet I noticed how carefully the guests avoided my eyes. It wasn't hard to guess why. They still remembered the name card in front of me that had labeled me staff. Severin carved the turkey as though he'd roasted it himself, smiling for the family like a performer on stage. My mother watched him proudly, as if his every movement were a triumph. Doesn't he look just like your grandfather when he does that? She said to an aunt, her voice carrying down the table. Someone answered, He's got such presence. Not one word was spoken about the hours I had spent seasoning, basting, and timing every side dish. I forced myself to eat in silence, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. Food can hide silence, I thought, but not the weight of what's unspoken. It was my father, Cassander, who finally raised his glass, the polished patriarch in his role. Tonight we celebrate family, he declared, voice ringing. We thank God for bringing us together. And we look to the future, carried by the strength of our name, and by Severin, the future of this family. Applause rose. I stared at the flickering candle in front of me, the wax pooling, fighting the urge to sink into my chair. I spoke quietly at first, then louder so my words couldn't be ignored. I helped too. The table stilled for a moment. Cassander lowered his glass, eyes narrowing as though I'd committed a breach of etiquette. Don't exaggerate, Ophira. You've never really done anything for this family. Gasps scattered. A cousin coughed into his napkin, another reached for her wine as though the stem could anchor her. I felt the eyes on me, waiting for me to fight or fold. I kept my voice calm. I've paid for more than you remember. He leaned forward, his face hard. Paying bills doesn't make you family. The words hit like a blade, slicing through the air, slicing through years of effort. I sat back, silent, my fork cold in my hand, and for a moment I thought I could hear only the sound of my own heartbeat. The others avoided my gaze, as though acknowledging me might implicate them. Severin basked in the space my father had carved out for him, grinning like a victor. Dinner resumed, but the taste of food had soured. Conversations rippled around me, punctuated by bursts of laughter that seemed to echo how alone I was at that table. Later, as the pie was being served, my mother leaned close to a neighbor, but pitched her voice loud enough for me to catch. If not for Severin, we'd have no dignity left. Ophira, she just causes drama. The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against porcelain. Heads turned briefly, then turned away. The neighbor's smile froze, unsure whether to nod or stay quiet. Across from me, a cousin glanced at me with pity, but said nothing. Her words stung worse than my father's. My mother's whisper wasn't just a comment, it was poison delivered with precision. I thought back to something I'd once read. They say mothers build daughters, but mine dismantled me piece by piece. I forced my hands flat against the table, pressing down as if to steady myself. I caught Marielle's eyes. She looked stricken, her sympathy shining through like a faint light in the dark. I wanted to shout. I wanted to say, I am the reason you still have this house. I am the one who covers your bills. But I didn't. I clenched my fists in my lap and held my head high. Silence became my shield. If they thought I was broken, let them. What they didn't know was that I was gathering everything, every word, every humiliation, and I would use it. That night, their words cut deeper than any knife on the table. But what they didn't know was that wounds can also sharpen the blade you'll use to fight back. The feast had begun. Plates were filled, glasses topped off, and the sound of cutlery striking porcelain filled the air. Guests murmured their approval at the spread laid before them. Turkey perfectly golden, vegetables roasted with herbs, pies lined neatly on the sideboard. I had prepared it all, yet as the compliments flowed, not a single one landed in my direction. "This turkey looks wonderful, Severin," an aunt exclaimed, as though he had done more than carve it. Morwenna's voice followed smoothly, beaming with pride. "We're lucky to have him carry our family's future." I pushed peas across my plate and smiled politely. I seasoned every dish, but they only tasted him, I thought. Around me, heads nodded in agreement, voices overlapping in admiration. Cassander stood again, raising his glass. His deep voice carried authority, and all fell silent to hear him. "To Severin," he said, "a man of vision. A man who will bring our name back to dignity." The toast ended with a chorus of clinking glasses. My mother's eyes shone, pride radiating from her face, as though Severin had already saved us all. I swallowed hard, gathering courage. "I've had good news too," I said, my voice steady. "I was promoted last month. It means more stability for me and—" Morwenna interrupted with a wave of her hand, smiling but sharp. "Oh, Ophira, don't bore everyone with work talk. Let's hear about Severin's new venture." The words cut, the dismissal sharper than any blade. Guests leaned forward eagerly as Severin cleared his throat, basking in the attention. He smirked in my direction, the corners of his lips curving with quiet triumph. "It's a strange thing," I thought, "to pay for the roof above people's heads and still be treated like a guest in your own home." As the chatter continued, Severin stole the moment fully. "I've got something exciting to share," he said, standing slightly as though ready to give a keynote speech. I opened my mouth to continue about my project, but he sliced through my words. "I actually closed a big deal at work," I began. "Speaking of deals," he interjected loudly, "wait until you hear mine." The room erupted with anticipation. Forks were set down, wine glasses held midair, every eye trained on him. "I've been planning a new business," Severin said, pacing slightly by his chair. "It's innovative, it's bold, and it will change the way people live here. Investors are already interested." Laughter, applause, questions came from every side of the table. "That's amazing, Severin. You always think big." My words hung in the air, unfinished, forgotten. I sat back, my throat dry, my heart pounding. Across the table, my uncle clinked glasses with him, beaming. "That's the spirit. That's how you carry a family forward." I watched, heat building under my skin. Spotlights don't always shift by accident, I thought bitterly. Sometimes people steal them on purpose, and the audience happily lets them. I tried to rejoin the conversation. "My promotion came after months of hard work." But Severin cut me again, raising his hand dramatically. "This idea will need about 50,000 to launch, but once it's running, we're talking millions in revenue." Guests clapped, nodding with approval. I closed my mouth. My story didn't matter. My voice had no stage. Morwena's voice rang above the clamor, pride thick in her tone. This is what we mean when we talk about legacy. Severin is carrying us. I looked around. Relatives leaned toward him, hungry for more. They celebrated his dreams as though they were already reality, while I faded into the wallpaper. They weren't just ignoring me, I realized. They were rewriting the story to erase me. I glanced down at my untouched plate, then back at their faces glowing with admiration for him. A quiet clarity took root in me. Respect, I remembered, is earned, but sometimes it has to be demanded. I leaned back, folding my hands calmly in my lap. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I would remember, and I would not stay silent forever. Patience has limits. I told myself that one more insult, one more theft of my worth, and I wouldn't hold my tongue again. I didn't know the next blow would come so quickly, and it would push me past the point of return. The room had grown heavier, though laughter still rose from different corners of the table. The noise was like static, masking the tension that pressed against my skin. Severin basked in the glow of his own story, sipping wine like a celebrity giving interviews, while relatives leaned closer to catch every word. I felt eyes flick toward me in quick glances, some curious, some cautious, like they were waiting for me to crack. My father's posture had stiffened, his shoulders square, his jaw clenched in a way I knew too well. My mother smiled too tightly, her hands fussing with napkins, though nothing needed adjusting. Severin leaned back smugly, satisfied with the attention he'd stolen. Sometimes silence screams louder than any word, I thought, and in that silence, I knew they were setting me up for the next blow. I reached for my glass of water, but my father's voice cut across the room. "Severin," he said, loud enough for everyone to turn, "why don't you sit closer to me?" Confused murmurs rippled as Cassander rose from his seat. He walked toward me, hands on the back of my chair. Before I could react, he tugged it back, the legs scraping against the floor. My body jolted as the chair slid away from the table. He then motioned for Severin to take the spot. The wine in front of me tipped, spilling across the white tablecloth, creeping toward the centerpiece. A few relatives flinched, but quickly looked away. "Dad," I said quietly, gripping the edge of the chair. "What are you doing?" Cassander's eyes bore into mine, cold and dismissive. "Your brother should sit here. He belongs at the head of the table." I swallowed, my voice tightening. "And I don't?" "You're fine where you are." His words landed like stones, final and unmoving. Severin smirked, sliding smoothly into the chair beside my father. The table adjusted itself, conversations shifting back to him, as though my removal were a natural rearrangement. I stared at the tablecloth stained by the spill, the imbalance obvious. It wasn't about a chair. It was about erasing me from the center of their story. Heat climbed through me, a flush of humiliation mixing with anger I could no longer disguise with polite silence. I straightened in my seat, my fork steady in my hand. "I've contributed more than you remember," I said, my voice calm but ringing across the table. Cassander slammed his palm against the wood so hard the plates rattled. "Get out!" he roared. "Paying bills doesn't make you family." The room froze. Gasps broke the stillness, then silence heavier than before. Someone coughed. A glass clinked nervously, but no one spoke. My mother leaned in, her voice soft yet sharp enough to slice. "You're just jealous of your brother." I turned my head slowly toward her. "Jealous?" My voice was quiet, but my words carried. "Then let him pay the bills I've carried." Severin shifted uneasily in his new seat, his smirk faltering for the first time. His eyes darted toward our mother, searching for backup, but my parents stayed stone-faced. Around the table, glances exchanged like secret conversations. Cousins lowered their eyes to their plates, embarrassed for me, or perhaps for themselves, caught in the lie of silence. Marielle, sitting further down, met my gaze. Her eyes glistened, sympathy written across her face, though she said nothing. 8 years of sacrifice, I thought, reduced to nothing with one sentence. I felt the room spinning with humiliation, but beneath it, a core of strength rose, Steady and deliberate, they had spoken their truth, my existence dismissed, my efforts erased. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. The table remained frozen, no one daring to speak. The silence pressed against my ears until even the tick of the old wall clock felt deafening. Severin laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "Come on, it's Thanksgiving. Let's not fight." But no one laughed with him. I looked toward Isolde and Marielle. They alone seemed to see me, not as an intruder or a staff member or a jealous sibling, but as someone who had finally been pushed too far. I pressed my napkin onto the stain on the tablecloth, blotting it gently, my movements deliberate. Inside, the decision crystallized. They thought they ended me when they told me to leave, but what they didn't know was, that night, I was already planning how to end their illusion of power. I didn't move right away after my father's words cut through the room like an axe. "Get out. Paying bills doesn't make you family." The command still echoed in my ears as the table filled with uneasy silence. My body stiffened, but I stayed rooted to the chair. Around me, relatives exchanged whispers, their voices low, as if speaking too loudly would make them part of the conflict. Severin smirked, satisfied with his victory. My mother avoided my eyes, suddenly busy with the napkins. I steadied myself with a long breath, the rage in my chest demanding release. Walking out in silence would mean they had won. No, not this time. When someone tries to erase you, sometimes the only way to survive is to write yourself back into the story. With deliberate movements, I reached for my bag by the chair. The fabric whispered against the floor as I pulled it up and unzipped it. The chatter at the table quieted, curiosity pushing through the tension. I placed a thick folder on the table, right between the candlesticks and the untouched cranberry sauce. My fingers pressed it flat, my heartbeat steady but strong. "You want to say I've done nothing?" I said, my voice calm, even. "These are 10 years of payments. My money, my work." The rustle of paper filled the room as I opened the folder, spreading out tax receipts, mortgage statements, utility bills. Every page bore my name. The silence was immediate, heavy. Guests leaned forward unconsciously, their eyes scanning the evidence. My father's face darkened. "This is unnecessary," Cassander snapped. "We don't air private matters at the table." I met his glare. "You made it public when you told me to get out." Gasps rippled, a cousin muttered, "Oh my God," and an uncle shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The documents spoke louder than I ever could. My mother reached across, fingers brushing the papers as if she could sweep them away. "Stop this, Ophira." "This isn't the time." I pulled the papers back, stacking them neatly. "It's exactly the time. You wanted everyone to know I wasn't family. Now they'll know the truth." For once, Severin's smirk faltered. He leaned back, crossing his arms, but his eyes darted nervously toward the evidence. Paper doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just tells the truth. I looked directly at my parents, refusing to blink. For a decade, I carried the property taxes, the upkeep, even the gardener's wages. Who paid the flood insurance when the storm hit? Who replaced the roof tiles after the winds tore them loose? My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. "Not Severin," I continued. "Not you." Severin slammed his hand on the table, his confidence cracking. "You're just trying to make me look bad." I turned to him, my expression calm. "You don't need my help for that." Murmurs broke out, the relatives who had watched silently now visibly uncomfortable. A cousin whispered to her husband, "I had no idea." My aunt lowered her eyes, shame crossing her face. Inside, something shifted. For years, I thought staying silent meant love, that carrying the burden without complaint was what good daughters did. But silence had only made me disappear. Now the truth lay on the table for all to see, and there was no way to tuck it back into the shadows. The room was filled with uneasy stillness. Some relatives finally nodded toward me, their eyes acknowledging what they had ignored for years. My Aunt Isolde gave me a small, approving look, the first true ally visible at that table. Morwenna muttered under her breath, "This is not the time," her voice weak, stripped of authority. I leaned back in my chair, shoulders squared, no longer shrinking. I had spoken. I had shown proof. And there was no erasing ink on paper. They could ignore my voice, but they couldn't deny the evidence staring back at them. And as I watched their faces shift, I knew this was only the beginning of my fight. I left their house that night with my father's words still echoing in my ears, like waves slamming against a seawall. Get out. Paying bills doesn't make you family. The air outside was cool, but inside my chest burned. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, driving through Honolulu's streets lit by storefronts and holiday lights. The glow of the city contrasted sharply with the humiliation pressing down on me. Cars passed, families walked with shopping bags, laughter carried in the breeze. To them it was Thanksgiving night, but for me, it felt like exile. By the time I reached my apartment, the adrenaline had drained into a heavy exhaustion. I set the dishes I had brought back onto the counter, though most were untouched. My small apartment was quiet, free from the clatter of dishes and cruel words. That silence was overwhelming, but it also gave me space to breathe. For the first time that night, I could hear only myself. I sank into the chair at my desk, staring at the folder still inside my bag, the same one I had laid out on their table hours before. My chest rose and fell, steadying as I realized I wasn't finished. I pulled the folder out, placing it in front of me, the papers crisp under my fingers. Tax receipts, mortgage statements, utility bills, years of proof that the house stood because of me. I flipped through them, one by one. Every page felt heavier than the last. This house isn't theirs. It never really was. It's mine. The thought landed with clarity. For years, I had convinced myself that paying these bills was love, that it was duty. But the evidence told another story. Chains, each one signed with my name. My parents had worn pride like armor, but the weight of the roof, the walls, the very foundation, they were mine. I leaned back, debating with myself. Should I keep carrying them, keep bleeding myself dry in the hope that someday they would see me? Or should I let go? Cut the chain, and finally free myself. As the clock ticked past midnight, the decision took shape inside me. I would not keep paying for a house that erased me. I would sell it. I would take back what was mine and leave them with nothing but the truth they had tried to bury. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved with certainty. I drafted an email to Callista, my lawyer and longtime friend, attaching the scans of the documents. My subject line was short, final. Proceed with the sale. Effective immediately. For a moment, I paused, staring at the blinking cursor. Fear flickered in me, but it was thin, quickly swallowed by something stronger. I heard Callista's voice in my head, imagined her asking, "Are you sure?" My answer was clear. I've never been more sure. I pressed send. The soft click was more than a sound. It was a release, like cutting the final cord binding me to them. The words of Nelson Mandela came to me then. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more. Tonight, my dignity mattered more than fear. Moments later, my phone buzzed. It was Callista, replying almost instantly. I've already lined up an interested buyer. A local investor has been waiting for an opportunity in Kahala. We can finalize electronically. I exhaled sharply, my pulse quickening. She sent over the documents, her efficiency a lifeline. I scrolled through, heart pounding, each page confirming the reality I was stepping into. I read every line, though my decision never wavered. With a trembling hand but a steady heart, I added my signature. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at the screen in silence. It was done. While they toasted Severin at that table, I sold the very roof over their heads. Sadness fluttered in me. This had been my childhood home, however broken, but relief surged stronger. My shoulders loosened, my breath deepened. I had shifted the balance. I closed the laptop slowly, pushing it away, and leaned back in my chair. The weight I had carried for years felt lighter, replaced by something new, power. They told me I wasn't family, I whispered into the empty room. By morning, They will learn that this house was never theirs to claim. I woke with a start, the weight of last night still pressing on my chest. The glow of my laptop remained in my memory, the final image of my signature on documents that would alter everything. I had pressed send, knowing there was no going back. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls, text messages stacking one on top of the other. I didn't reach for it right away. Instead, I sat up slowly, rubbing the back of my neck. My body felt heavy, but inside, there was an odd clarity. Finally, curiosity pushed me to scroll through the chaos. Messages from unknown numbers, cousins, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored them until one voicemail caught my attention. It was from Aunt Isolde. Her voice trembled. "Ophira, your parents are in chaos. Police are at the house. Neighbors are outside watching. They think they're being evicted right now. Call me back, please." I let the message play again, my fingers pressing tightly around the phone. Sometimes karma doesn't wait years, I thought. Sometimes it shows up the very next morning. Through calls and texts, the picture formed vividly in my mind. The Kahala house, once the pride of my parents, was now a spectacle. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, whispering. Blue and red lights flashed across the lawn. Police cars idled in the driveway. Severin was pacing the grass, hands in his hair, shouting into his phone. My father's voice carried over everything. "There must be a mistake. This is our house." A police officer stood firm. "Sir, the documents are valid. Ownership has transferred. The sale is in process." I could imagine my father's face reddening. "She can't do this to us. She's our daughter." The officer didn't waver. "She can, sir. Everything has been filed properly." Morwenna was crying in the background. "She betrayed us," she sobbed, clutching her chest for effect. "After everything we've done for her." When I read that line in a cousin's message, I laughed bitterly. Betrayal? I had been loyal for 10 years. What they felt wasn't betrayal. It was consequence. The shouting grew louder in every update I received. Neighbors filmed on their phones, gossip spreading before the sun had fully risen. My parents, who once boasted about Severin as their legacy, were now the subject of whispered ridicule. Amid the chaos, Severin's meltdown grew clearer. He had been telling investors for months that the house could serve as collateral for his newest venture. Now, without it, their patience collapsed. One of his voicemails landed on my phone, his voice frantic. "You ruined my future. You knew this house was my leverage. Investors are pulling out. Do you even realize what you've done?" I didn't answer, but in my head, my response was steady. "No. Severin. You ruined it by building it on lies." An hour later, another update came through, this time from Isolde, her tone sharper. Investors showed up at the house. They demanded answers. Severin couldn't look them in the eye. They called him reckless, said he embarrassed them. He stormed off like a child. I pictured him there, face red, his usual charm stripped away. For once, my brother couldn't smile his way out of a disaster. Money talks louder than excuses, and the truth had spoken. In my apartment, the sunlight crept across the floor, warming the quiet space. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the room. Sitting at the small kitchen table, I scrolled through the dozens of notifications stacking up. My parents' voices, Severin's rage, relatives pleading for me to explain. But instead of fear, I felt calm, almost peaceful. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about balance being restored. And finally, the scales had tipped. I sipped slowly, letting the silence fill me. I didn't call back. I didn't explain. My silence was the loudest message I had ever sent. That morning, chaos belonged to them. By the time the sun rose higher over Kahala the next morning, the chaos had spilled beyond the family walls. Neighbors who had been whispering in driveways were now standing openly in clusters, watching. Severin, never one to hide from a crowd, was on the front steps of the house, his voice loud enough for half the street to hear. "It's all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his arms outstretched as though he could physically shield the family name with a gesture. "There are papers being misinterpreted. We'll have this straightened out by the afternoon." But his voice cracked at the edges, and the neighbors weren't convinced. Murmurs passed from one group to another. Words like foreclosure and lawsuit traveled fast. I stayed back, not interfering, watching from a distance where I could see without being pulled into the storm. In Hawaii, reputation is everything. The island may be big to outsiders, but for those who live here, it feels small. Once the neighbors start whispering, your legacy crumbles faster than any house ever could. And in that moment, I knew their carefully guarded facade was splintering before everyone's eyes. As Severin tried to summon confidence he didn't possess, the sound of car doors slamming drew attention. 3 men in business suits stepped out, their expressions tight with anger. Investors. They didn't bother with polite greetings. One of them marched right up the driveway, his finger jabbing toward Severin. "You promised us a secured deal," he said, his voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Where's the house you claimed would back our money?" Severin's shoulders stiffened, but the bravado drained from his face. "It was supposed to be ours," he muttered. "Supposed to be?" another investor snapped. "You misled us. You told us the property was yours to leverage. It was never yours, and now you've destroyed our trust." The crowd of neighbors went quiet, every word echoing. Morwenna stepped forward, her hands raised like she could soothe the air itself. "Please, there's been a mistake. He didn't mean—" But her pleas fell flat. The investors weren't listening. The truth had too many witnesses. I stood with my arms crossed, letting it unfold without a word. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. The facts were doing it for me. Severin's face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. His reputation, carefully crafted by years of indulgence and parental favoritism, shattered in a single confrontation. For once, my brother couldn't charm his way out. Inside the house, the dining table from last night still bore the scars of our battle. Wine stains, crumbs, the folded edges of napkins abandoned mid-meal. I stepped through the doorway quietly, unnoticed in the chaos outside, and carried with me a sealed envelope. I placed it on the table exactly where I had sat, the same table where my father had told me I wasn't family. The room seemed to hold its breath as my parents entered behind me, followed by relatives curious enough to witness what would come next. "This," I said, sliding the envelope forward, "is the last check you'll ever cash in my name." Cassander's jaw locked, his fists clenched at his sides. Morwenna's face drained of color, her eyes darting toward the paper like it might explode. Severin, still breathless from the confrontation outside, glared but couldn't speak. The silence was heavier than any shouting match. Neighbors lingered in the doorway, relatives pressed close, and every eye was fixed on me. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I didn't need to. The statement was final, clean, undeniable. It wasn't revenge by fury, it was closure with cold clarity. I looked at them each in turn, my father's clenched jaw, my mother's pale cheeks, my brother's wild eyes. Then I turned away, walking out past the witnesses who said nothing. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones carried out in silence. I didn't feel joy, not exactly. What filled me instead was relief, a release of a weight I had carried for too long. Healing would take time, I knew. But first, I had to reclaim my dignity, and I had just done it. They had tried to erase me, but I had written the last line of the story. And soon, a witness would step forward to make sure no one could deny it. The morning after the unraveling was heavy with silence. The Kahala house no longer carried the proud air it once did. Its walls, though intact, felt smaller, darker, as if they were ashamed of what had happened. Relatives sat scattered in the living room, sipping coffee they didn't taste, murmuring in hushed tones. The laughter of neighbors from outside drifted in like a cruel reminder that the family's downfall was now public knowledge. Cassander sat stiffly in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes hard as stone. Morwenna hovered near the window, wringing her hands, but still managing to portray herself as the victim. "Ungrateful," she whispered again and again, like the word could restore her dignity. Severin avoided everyone's eyes. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, but his bitterness was clear. His jaw twitched every time someone mentioned the word investors. No one dared confront them. They spoke around me instead of to me, painting me as the betrayer while pretending their shame was merely a misunderstanding. But beneath it, tension simmered. I could see it in the way relatives fidgeted, glancing at one another, silently asking, "Are we going to keep pretending?" They thought silence would protect them, I reflected. But silence, when cracked, unleashes truth louder than a shout. It was Aunt Isolde who cracked it. She stood suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. All eyes turned to her, surprised, because she had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker. But her voice, when she spoke, was sharp and unwavering. "Enough," she said, her gaze moving from Cassander to Morwenna. "This charade has gone on too long." My father's brows furrowed. "This isn't your concern, Isolde." She took a step forward, her voice rising. "It became my concern the moment you shamed Ophira in front of us all." We all sat here, silent, while you erased the one person who has carried this family for years. We knew it, we saw it, and we let it happen. Gasps broke around the room. A cousin shifted uncomfortably, an uncle cleared his throat but said nothing. Morwenna's face went pale, her lips trembling. Cassander's voice hardened. "Watch yourself. This family matter doesn't need your commentary." But Isolde didn't flinch. "It's not commentary, it's truth." She turned to the others. "How many of you knew? How many of you heard them brag about Severin while it was Ophira who kept this roof from collapsing? Don't deny it." The room rippled with nervous glances. No one spoke, but their silence confirmed everything. I sat frozen, shock mixing with a wave of relief. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. Someone else, an elder with weight in the family, had broken ranks. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but Isolde's voice cut through. "You always said Severin helped you, that he supported you," she said, her eyes narrowing. "But I've kept my own records. I've saved the old receipts. Do you want me to show everyone?" Her words landed like a blow. Murmurs spread as she pulled a folder from her bag, thick with paper. She opened it with deliberate care, spreading documents on the coffee table for all to see. "These are utility bills, property tax receipts, insurance premiums. And whose name do you see?" A cousin leaned forward hesitantly. "It's Ophira's." Isolde nodded firmly. "Every single one. For 10 years. You call that temporary?" Morwenna sputtered. "Those were just temporary arrangements." Isolde's eyes blazed. 10 years is not temporary." The room erupted in murmurs. Heads turned toward Cassander and Morwenna. Severin's face reddened, his fists clenched. With a loud curse, he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Cassander's lips pressed into a hard line. His face flushed red, but he had no words. The evidence was undeniable. My mother's eyes filled with tears, though whether they were of shame or anger, I couldn't tell. I looked at the papers, my heart pounding. I had already proven it the night before, but hearing it from someone else gave the truth a weight my words alone had never carried. I turned to Isolde, my voice trembling but steady. "Thank you." She placed a hand on mine. "It's past time, Ophira." Marielle crossed the room and hugged me tightly. She whispered into my ear, "We see you. Don't ever think you're alone again." I closed my eyes, the warmth of her words cutting deeper than any insult ever had. For years, I begged for recognition from the wrong people. And now, without asking, it came from those who truly saw me. I didn't need my father's apology. I didn't need my mother's acknowledgement. I had my own validation now, and it was enough. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. But the true closure didn't come from them. It came from within me. The quiet after the storm was almost unsettling. For days, my phone had not stopped ringing. Angry calls, desperate texts, endless voicemails from my parents, from Severin, from relatives who had taken sides when it was convenient. Now, as I sat in my apartment overlooking the ocean, I pressed delete all without a second thought. The trade winds carried the scent of salt through my window, the rhythmic crash of waves filling the silence around me. I wrapped my hands around a warm cup of coffee, staring out at the horizon where the sun spilled gold across the water. Peace, I realized, isn't the absence of noise. It's the decision to no longer let the noise control you. They still tried to make me feel guilty, still tried to spin their narrative of betrayal. But the messages rolled off me now. Their voices no longer had power. For the first time in years, my own silence felt stronger than their shouting ever had. It was in that silence that my grandfather's words came back to me. I must have been 9, sitting with him beneath the giant banyan tree behind his old plantation-style house. He had looked at me with eyes softened by years of struggle and said, "One day, you must hold on to yourself, because no one else can do it for you." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought family would always hold me up. I thought love was something guaranteed by blood. But now, decades later, his words anchored me. They had been waiting in the back of my mind for this very moment. Hold on to yourself. That was the lesson, and I had done it. Selling the house wasn't revenge, it was a declaration. It wasn't about money or bricks or land. It was about proving that I was never for sale. I pulled out my laptop once more, opened a blank email, and typed one final message. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't cruel, it was honest. To Cassander, Morwenna, and Severin, you told me paying bills doesn't make me family. You were right, because family is love, not debt. And since there's no love here, I am no longer bound to you, Ophira. I hit send, then immediately blocked their numbers, deleted their contacts, and emptied the recycle bin on my computer. One click at a time, I severed every last digital chain. Closure doesn't come when they say sorry. Closure comes when you stop waiting for it. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, my chest lighter than it had been in years. A week later, the wire transfer from the sale cleared. I invested part of it in a condo of my own in Honolulu. Nothing extravagant, but mine. The rest went into starting my own consulting firm. My name on the paperwork, my vision guiding its growth. I didn't do it alone. Aunt Isolde became my regular coffee companion, and Marielle often joined us, laughter weaving through our afternoons like stitches closing old wounds. Sometimes the family you choose is the only one that deserves to sit at your table. Looking out from the balcony of my new home, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child under that banyan tree. Contentment. Not bitter, not angry, free. My story began with a chair at the wrong end of the table, I whispered to the sea. It ended with me standing tall, at my own. And maybe, just maybe, that was my grandfather's lesson all along.